Federal immigration authorities frequently cannot do the work they do without the cooperation of state and local law enforcement. And in the wake of the election of Donald Trump, a coalition of activists began to see how they could mobilize to protect themselves from racially motivated federal actions. Christina Sinha of Advancing Justice and her colleagues had an idea to target the links between federal and state law enforcement and force state and local law enforcement to put community first. Christina.
My name is Christina Sinha. I'm a staff attorney and program manager in the National Security and Civil Rights Program at Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus. And I'm here today to discuss how we can use local strategies to challenge federal government surveillance of the Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian community, which I'll be using an acronym AMEMSA for short. Specifically, we'll be discussing a local law that fights back against FBI and JTTF surveillance of the AMEMSA community. And here's the 30-second trailer for the presentation. The FBI's rules allow for racial profiling and mass surveillance of the AMEMSA community. Local police are bound by rules that do not allow them to partake in that kind of domestic surveillance. But when the local police start partnering with the FBI in a particular context, the context of the JTTF, those local rules and state rules go out the window. So the local law I'm here to talk about is meant to ensure that local and state law are followed by every local police department officer, regardless of whether or not they're in the JTTF. So hopefully this is how you turn. Yes. So here's a quick roadmap of where we're going to be going. I'll talk, for those who are unfamiliar with it, recognizing that this is a mixed audience, I'll talk a little bit about what the JTTF is. I'll spend a little bit more time about what the problem is that we're trying to address. I'll address a partial solution in the form of this local strategy. And I'll also give an honorable mention to several other local strategies that can be used, packaged in tandem, or done separately to challenge the same issue. But before we jump in, I just wanted to take a quick moment to touch on the scope of this presentation. So even though it focuses on the FBI's surveillance of the AMEMSA community, our community is not the only one being surveilled. And we're not the first community to be branded wholesale as national security threats and surveilled. There's a long history, as we learned about thoroughly today, of our government ascribing individual attributes like loyalty and guilt to entire communities. And there's a long history of the US government justifying mass surveillance and targeting of racial and ethnic groups by claiming that those communities posed a national security threat. So even though we will focus on the AMEMSA community in for the next few minutes, this is not an AMEMSA issue, and it's not an immigrant issue. It's an issue that affects everyone in the United States. So with that, I'll jump into the JTTF itself. So the JTTF, or the Joint Terrorism Task Force, is a particular kind of partnership between a local police department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. And there are a number of different ways that the two can work together. The JTTF is simply one specific context. And I mentioned local police and the federal police. However, many other federal agencies participate in the JTTF, most troublingly, ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Here's the crux of the problem with the JTTF. It cedes local control of local resources to the federal government for no apparent reason. And they are able to accomplish this with 3 magic letters: MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. These are contracts that local police, in almost every instance, must sign in order to participate in the JTTF. It's a standard contract written by the FBI. So unsurprisingly, the FBI gives itself almost all control over the officers that are working in it. And when this happens, local officers end up following federal rules instead of local ones. And of course, there are huge issues with that, and that's what we turn to now. As I mentioned, the crux of the problem is that the FBI's rules are problematic, and even though local and state rules are stronger, when the local police start working with the FBI in the JTTF, all those stronger state and local protections go out the window. Excuse me. So here's a little bit about why the FBI's rules themselves are problematic for those who are unfamiliar with it. There are 3 levels of FBI investigations, and I'll focus only on the lowest level. And those kinds of investigations are called assessments. And even though they are the lowest level, they are incredibly intrusive. If the FBI opens an assessment on you, they can physically surveil you day and night. They can use informants to track you and get information on you. They can interview people, your friends, family, coworkers about you, and they can coerce you into submitting into so-called voluntary interviews. They can check databases about you. They can ask foreign governments for information about you. And they can create a file on you, which includes your immigration status, that is accessible to ICE. This information is not kept in a manila folder and then locked away securely in that agent's drawer. It's put into databases such as shared through fusion centers and are widely accessible across the federal government. So given how intrusive these are, we would hope that they are at least somewhat cautious in who they unleash this tool on, but that is decidedly not the case. The FBI agents do not need to check with the supervisor before they open an assessment. They do not need reasonable suspicion to open an assessment. They don't even need a factual predicate. And a factual predicate simply means any fact, some fact, any fact at all that shows that maybe you are up to no good. Maybe you have some nefarious motive in mind. They don't even have to meet that standard. All they need is an authorized purpose, and national security counts as an authorized purpose. So what does this mean? Anyone can be targeted, literally anyone. They can open an assessment on a person even if the agents know 100% that that person is innocent. If this all seems unfamiliar, that's not surprising. These standards are very, very different than the standards that we're familiar with in the context of local police. Things that we recognize, like reasonable suspicion, probable cause, these are extraordinarily different standards. And in addition to the protections of reasonable suspicion, which all police departments are bound by, many states and local jurisdictions actually have additional protections against domestic intelligence gathering, against things like assessments. And even though this is not a California thing, because Asian Law Caucus is based in San Francisco, I'm going to use California and San Francisco as an example. So this is just a quick comparison of things that are needed. So for the FBI, they need an authorized purpose but no facts. The California Constitution, the Constitution itself says that you need articulable criminal predicate. And San Francisco goes farther. In specific contexts, you need articulable and reasonable suspicion. So obviously there's a disconnect between the federal rules and the FBI's rules, the federal rules and local and state rules. So what trumps what? Unfortunately, because of those contracts, the FBI's rules trump local rules by design. And those contracts show why. So up here, you'll see a couple of examples of those contracts. On the right, you'll see the standard contract. It is available online via the Brennan Center's website, and it is what all other jurisdictions' MOUs are modeled on. So you'll see San Francisco's on the left. But here's the key operative phrase from the standard contract. And this is what the local police department has to sign. The local police department fully understands that local police officers who work in the JTTF are not allowed to discuss official JTTF business with their police department supervisor unless that supervisor gets a security clearance, which often doesn't happen, and the FBI JTTF supervisor specifically says it's okay. So I want to think about this question. How can there be civilian oversight and control of local officers if the chain of command doesn't even know what those local officers are doing? So these are not abstract problems. JTTF assessments have done real harm to communities and to movements. And as we've mentioned before, the FBI's rules trump local rules by design. And when that happens, the community suffers. So the Asian Law Caucus, CARE, and several other organizations provide free legal representation to people who are being harassed by the FBI or the JTTF. So over the years, we have heard from hundreds of clients who have reported the truly inane and insulting questions that have been asked of them during these interactions. Some choice gems are up there on the screen for you to view. We have also seen recent reports of the JTTF targeting activists like Black Lives Matter, like water protectors, and other protesters. They show a disturbing pattern of falsely labeling peaceful activists as violent in order to justify even more intrusive surveillance. So clearly, we have a problem. And while there's currently very little we can do to change the FBI's rules from the top down, there is something we can do from the bottom up to slow down this trend of overbroad surveillance. What we can do is build our own wall. We can build a wall of resistance. Those officers that are in the JTTF, those local officers, are still local officers. They are San Francisco Police Department officers in the JTTF are still SFPD. They are paid for by San Francisco tax dollars. And keep in mind that JTTF is not the only context in which a local police department can work with the FBI. There are a number of different ways. There's no need to enter into this kind of arrangement in order to work with them to prevent crime and terrorism. So here's the crux of it. If the FBI wants local jurisdictions to gift them officers that are paid for by local tax dollars and make them work in the JTTF, local jurisdictions can insist that if that happens, local rules are followed, state rules are followed. And the other reality is this. The FBI, taking a step back, would not be able to surveil and harass our community to nearly the level that it does without the assistance of the local police. Though it's the local police that provide manpower that the FBI otherwise wouldn't have, and that also provide the knowledge of local communities. They don't know where the masjids are. The FBI doesn't know what halal markets people go to after Jummah. They need local police officers to help them figure that out. So I'm going to spend the last remaining time that I have now talking about the law itself. And even though the problem I laid out is a little bit complex, the partial solution, this local law, is actually quite simple. It was passed in San Francisco in 2012 with the help of 79 organizations that signed on to support it, that joined the Coalition for a Safe San Francisco. And that also included LGBTQIQ groups that remain strong advocates for the law today, Japanese American groups, and other members of the Japanese American community, including family members of Fred Korematsu. And this is what the law does. It's a short 2-page law, you see the front page here, that is designed to fit neatly into a city's existing structures and oversight mechanisms. And it says 3 simple things. It says, local police department, you can participate in the JTTF if you want to, but you can only do that if you can only participate if you don't violate state and local law when you do. If you violate state and local law, then we can pull you out of the JTTF. So the first thing is you can only participate in a manner that is fully consistent with state and local law. The second thing is that contract, if you want to change it, or if you want to sign a new one, you have to let the public know about it. And the public has to be able to comment on it and express their concerns about anything that you're trying to do there. And third, the chief of police has to submit a public annual report that talks about using appropriate public information that talks about the work that you've been doing in the JTTF. You want to take our officers and put them there? Tell us what they're doing. And cities have the power to do this. Now, this goes without saying probably for this crowd, but because conservative media outlets have spread out a lot of bad information about this, I will touch on this nonetheless. Here are some things that this law does not do. It does not stop the police from working with the JTTF, or from working with the FBI, and it doesn't even stop them from working in the JTTF. The law does not jeopardize safety. It actually makes everyone more safe. Because when law enforcement surveils communities, terrorizes communities, thank you, those community members are less likely to report crime. They're less likely to come to the police when they genuinely need help. And that makes everybody in that community less safe. Good police-community relations are essential to a safe city, and you can't have that if the local police are tarred with the FBI's surveillance brush. So just have a quick minute to talk about some other local strategies that use the same bottom-up approach to trying to push back on federal efforts. So one that's already been mentioned a couple of times is Sanctuary City, which I'm sure most folks here are familiar with. There's also anti-registry ordinances, which we just passed one in San Francisco, and we're trying to pass it in a number of other cities as well. And everyone remembers Donald Trump's famous promise to institute a Muslim registry, to make all Muslims, regardless of citizenship, register. And what the anti-registry ordinance does is say, federal government, if you try to come in and do this, we're not going to help you do this. And it was really powerful that San Francisco passed it because in World War II, San Francisco actually assisted the federal government in rounding up Japanese Americans and shipping them off to concentration camps. And the last is surveillance technology ordinances. These are, again, Oakland is in the middle of passing one right now. It basically says, police department, if you want to get shiny, brand new surveillance tools, you have to go through the public first. You have to explain to us why you think you want it, explain to us how you think you're going to use it, and we will then tell you whether it's okay for you to have it. And it can also be made retroactive. So these are a number of things that we can do to fight back, use our local power to enact federal change. Okay, so I think I ran over the 15 minutes, so if anybody has questions or if you need legal advice or resources, please feel free to contact me here. Thank you.